The honey key. The first time my future mother-in-law called me the help, the word didn't even sting. It landed like a snowflake on the surface of a hot pan and vanished into steam. And I just kept smiling because that's the kind of woman I am at 36 female. Stubborn. And practiced at swallowing small fires. I was born to a seamstress who stitched other people's joy into wedding dresses she could never afford. And I run a small bakery that smells like Sunday mornings and burnt sugar. I know what it means to be invisible in rooms where forks are heavier than the rent I used to pay. But there was something in the way Estelle said it, like she wasn't describing a job so much as a place in the food chain that told me this story was already reaching for me long before I knew it had been written. It was supposed to be a simple dinner, an informal engagement celebration at the Rosenthal house, where the chandeliers looked like frozen constellations and the table was an ocean of crystal. Julian squeezed my fingers under the linen, the way he does when he feels a storm forming. He whispers with his hands better than most men speak with their mouths. He's gentle that way. He had bought flowers from the corner stall where the petals always arrive with a little city dust on them. The ones I like because they look like something you fight for, not something plucked from a catalog. I had made a honey cake that tasted like August language thick. Golden. Full of the kind of sweetness that remembers the sting. Estelle's lipstick was a shade called something like Inheritance. Her pearls sat on her collarbones like two pale moons. "You bake," she said, gliding the word toward me as though it might leave a stain on the tablecloth. "How industrious." She lifted her glass to Julian. "She reminds me of the girl who used to bring Mother her custards. What was her name? That summer when the heat broke the electricity and we lit candles everywhere. Do you remember that, the girl with flour on her sleeves?" She looked at me as if she had just discovered a rare species at her own table. "Yes, the help." Julian's thumb moved over the tender inside of my wrist. He said my name softly. "Mara." A kind of apology. I smiled because smiling is an armor that passes for grace. I was a hospice nurse before I opened the bakery. I told Estelle, keeping my voice level. Braided with nothing but air. "I took care of your mother for 8 months. I could feel the old ache rise in me as I spoke. The hospice days. The nights that stretched like elastic, and then snapped. The sound of Agnes Rosenthal's breath, when the pain eased and she fell into a thin sleep. Agnes with her papers. Her thin blue veins. The honey jar on the windowsill that caught the late sun and made the kitchen glow like a small cathedral. I learned your mother's tea preferences. I said, bergamot in the morning, chamomile at night, no sugar, honey. If she was feeling tender, she called me dear. Not the help. In from say. Across the table, the chandelier poured down its glitter. The men Victor, Estelle's second husband, and 2 older uncles made the tight-faced expressions of those who wish for a different universe to manifest on command. Estelle's mouth curled in a smile with no temperature. Mother was fond of strays, she said. She was always bringing home projects. Birds with broken wings. People with broken dreams. She lifted her spoon. Tapped crystal with crystal. And the sound was so pure, it felt like it might split something inside me. "I'm sure she was very kind to you." That was when I understood that Estelle had not merely placed me outside her circle. She had drawn a chalk line around me and dared me to step over it. I've spent my life erasing lines like that with my feet. I am not, by design, a woman who seeks war, but I am the daughter of a woman who taught me how to mend what people ruin and to call it art. I am the woman who sits with the dying, who learned how to hold the hand of someone slipping down the stairwell between worlds, and to murmur the names of every person they ever loved. I am the woman who watched Agnes's mouth tremble on a word she could not say. The afternoon she asked me to fetch the honey, and pressed a small, dull brass key into my palm, wrapped in a corner of wax paper. "When the house feels loud with the wrong kind of silence," she whispered, "you'll know where to look." She closed my fingers around it like she was teaching a secret to stay. After dinner, I washed dishes I hadn't dirtied just to set my heart down somewhere it could cool. The Rosenthal kitchen is larger than my entire first apartment. The windows gaze across a lawn so manicured it doesn't seem to belong to weather. When the warm water ran over my hands, the evening's performances blurred into a manageable hum. I know exactly how long to breathe in and how long to breathe out, so that nothing breaks on the way. That's the old nurse in me. That's the girl who learned to count pain like beads on a rosary until the string becomes a path. Estelle came in without looking at me. A habit I would come to recognize as a technique: if you refuse to look, you refuse to see. And if you don't see, you owe nothing. She opened a cabinet, retrieved a cut glass decanter, and poured herself bourbon that smelled like the first time you admit you're angry out loud. Mother liked you, she said to the window. She had a soft spot for kitchen girls. The word girl was a stick. She snapped idly in half. But you know how she was at the end, confused, sentimental. She would have given away the silver to anyone who placed a warm hand on her forehead. I turned off the water. The silence that followed had the thickness of unspoken confession. I held your mother's hand while she remembered the child she lost and never told you about. I said, not because I meant to say it, God knows. I meant to keep Agnes's stories with the same reverence I keep her honey jar. But because sometimes someone presses you against a wall, and the only way not to disappear is to write something true on the bricks. She wasn't confused. I added, she was a historian of her own heart. She saw further. At the end, than people who think money clears the horizon. Estelle's eyes slid over me then. Slow, like a blade under ribbons. She smiled. It's sweet, she said. How you believe dying people become saints. She lifted her glass in a little toast to no one at all. And when she left, her perfume lingered like a promise of rain that never falls. That night, Julian and I lay on top of the covers because neither of us wanted the bed to hold the weight of what had happened. He traced constellations on my shoulder with his fingertip. Invented names for them. The baker's crown, he said, touching the curve of my clavicle. The flower comet, he added, following the path of a freckle. He is 38 and carries his gentleness like a backpack that he would gladly set down if someone needed to borrow it. I'm sorry, he murmured. I will talk to her. I'll do more than talk. I'll draw lines. I'll cut ties. If I have to. His voice had the sincerity of a new map. I thought of my mother, who never drew lines from fear, only seams from love. I thought of Agnes, whose honey jar still glowed gold in my mind. I thought of the key wrapped in wax paper, heavy now in the small drawer where I keep my ribbons for tying boxes. The ones I choose by color, depending on the story each cake has to carry. Don't cut anything yet, I told him. And I kissed the spot just below his jaw where the skin tastes like a word you only say in the dark. I can stand being underestimated for a little while longer. It's a familiar chair. But later, when he slept, I slipped from the bed. The house was deep and quiet as a cathedral after the hymn ends. I padded barefoot to the pantry where a dozen jars of amber caught the starlight. The honey I had brought wildflower. From a woman named Luz who keeps bees in an orchard outside the city, sat side by side with jars that looked like museum pieces. Agnes used to keep one on the windowsill, in a squat jar with a chipped rim, the glass fogged with age. It wasn't there. Of course it wasn't. Estelle had remodeled the kitchen in grief's first month, turning the rooms where Agnes had loved things into rooms where Estelle controlled them. I opened cabinets until I found a shelf of things that didn't belong with the things they were stored beside. That's how you find what someone has hidden, by noticing where categories have been fractured. Aprons folded between table runners, a music box tucked among napkin rings, and, in the back, behind a set of crystal cordial glasses wrapped in tissue, a honey jar that wasn't like the others. Squat, chipped, the glass a little cloudy, like memory that has been put through too many wash cycles. My hands shook as if a cold wind had discovered me. The lid was stubborn as old secrets. When it finally gave, the scent that rose was not floral but paper and dust, and the ghost of summer. I tipped the jar, and something slid into my palm with a small, private sound. A key wrapped in wax paper, not the one I already had. Pressed into my hand the week before Agnes died. Another. Its twin. Or its holder. I don't know the right word for a key that arrives like a second breath. I unwrapped it and held both keys side by side. They were not identical. One had 3 teeth. The other, 2. One was brass, worn nearly smooth. The other kept a faint pattern of tiny stamped hearts that made no sense in a house that had no use for whimsy. The wax paper crackled like a small fire. On the inner fold hung a fragment of writing. Agnes's hand. Small and stubborn. The graphite had smudged, leaving only 2 legible words. Linen closet. My throat made a sound I didn't recognize. I have lived so much of my life in rooms where the next door is a question. And here were answers pretending to be metal. I put the keys in the pocket of my robe and moved through the sleeping house. The linen closet sat at the end of the hallway like a polite secret. It smelled faintly of starch and lavender. The respectable perfumes of a life that never spills. Inside, everything was folded to the point of tyranny. I touched the polished handles, the little brass labels sheets, guest towels, tablecloths, and tried to hear Agnes's voice inside my head the way I used to. The way it used to ribbon through the list of medications and the stories about the summer. She fell in love with a boy whose name she wouldn't say. Behind the bottom shelf, the paneling was not flush. My fingers found the seam the way a seamstress finds a loose thread by listening. I pushed. A small square of wood loosened. Quick as a breath held too long. A compartment revealed itself. In it, a stack of letters bound with narrow ribbon. The blue kind that looks like it remembers rain. Their edges had the softened look of things that have waited patiently for a reader. On top, a photograph Agnes at 20. Hair like a storm, about to make landfall. Standing beside a woman with my mother's eyes. My knees touched the carpet before I knew I had decided to kneel. I pressed the photograph to my heart like a prayer I'd forgotten. A prayer that had not forgotten me. The ribbon slipped free with the obedience of something relieved to be released. Letters. Dated in a hand unwavering across decades. To E. They began. And later, to my girl. Some had stamps that made me think of trains. Some had stains of what could have been tea. Or tears. Or the rain you run through to get to a mailbox before you change your mind. Under the letters, a document, thick with signatures. The kind of paper that alters the course of houses and names. My first instinct was to wake Julian. My second was to burn everything. My third, the one that came from the part of me that knows how to wait for a heartbeat to steady before you decide to cut a wire or leave it. Said red. So I sat cross-legged on the hallway floor. A woman with 2 keys cooling in her pocket and the future warming her hands. My pulse was loud enough to be mistaken for footsteps. Somewhere in the house. The refrigerator sighed. Outside. The night carried on. Indifferent. Infinite. I unfolded the first letter, and there was my mother's handwriting. Younger and more defiant than I had ever seen it. And there was Agnes's voice talking back across time. And there, between them, a history that was about to lift its head and recognize my face. The first letter was dated 35 years ago. Written in my mother's tidy cursive that looped like thread. My dearest Agnes. It began. I heard they've arranged your engagement. I've been baking through the nights just to quiet my hands. Every cake rises wrong. Every layer collapses, as if the air itself refuses to hold what we were. My breath caught. I read on. Line by line. Through the ache of a girl who once loved someone forbidden by a family that measured affection in assets. They think I won't survive this loss. She wrote. But I have a secret. There's something of you growing in me. I can already feel the flutter. Don't worry. I'll make a story of her. Not a scandal. The word her trembled through me like an echo from a forgotten hallway. Agnes's reply came weeks later. Written in ink so pale, it looked like it was dissolving into air. You must keep her safe. My father would have you erased if he knew. But I've hidden things, documents, names, the honey key. Someday, she'll come looking, and you'll know it's her because she'll ask about sweetness that stings. The letters kept going. Across the pages, two women built a secret life in language. They wrote about the child, me never naming me outright, but tracing my outline with metaphors of gardens and kitchens, of bees building honeycombs where no one thought to look. Agnes had tried to send for me when I was small, but Estelle, who was then only 15, had intercepted the messages. My mother, terrified, vanished from the Rosenthal orbit and raised me on sugar and silence. By the time I reached the last letter, my vision blurred. Agnes's handwriting had grown shaky, the words sliding toward the edge of the paper. When she finds this, tell her the truth. She was never astray. She was the rightful melody in a house that forgot its own song. I don't know how long I sat there, the paper softening against my palms. The clock down the hall ticked like a metronome for grief. I felt the old version of myself, Mara, the baker, Mara, the fiancé, Mara, the careful, begin to loosen. Thread by thread, I was Agnes's granddaughter. The house that had looked down on me had been built, in part, by the woman who made my existence possible. Estelle wasn't just a cruel matriarch, she was a gatekeeper, hiding the theft of an inheritance that had once belonged to the woman she called the help's mother. I took the letters, wrapped them back in their ribbon, and placed them in my bag along with both keys. One for truth, one for proof. By dawn, I was sitting at the bakery, the smell of yeast and memory filling the air. Julian arrived just as I unlocked the front door. His hair was a mess of worry. "You didn't come to bed," he said. "I thought God..." "Mara, I thought you'd left." "In a way," I said quietly. "I have." He followed me inside, confusion chasing sleep from his eyes. I told him everything about the keys, the letters, the truth buried behind folded linens. He listened, silent, except for the tightening of his jaw. "You're saying my grandmother," he began, "loved my mother," I said, "and that love made me..." He leaned back against the counter, blinking as though the world had shifted an inch to the left. "That makes you part of your family." I finished for him. By blood. By paper. By the same honey that runs through all of us. He didn't speak for a long moment. Then, softly, "My mother knew. She must have." "She knew," I said. "She sealed the second key. She hid the letters. She called me the help to keep me out of the house that should have been half mine." The first customers would be arriving in an hour, but the room felt too holy for commerce. Julian came around the counter, cupped my face, and said, "Tell me what you need me to do." "Nothing yet," I said. "Let me choose how to make this right." Later that week, Estelle's annual charity gala filled the Rosenthal estate with the clink of crystal and the hum of false benevolence. She was radiant in silver, the color of sharp things polished to look kind. I arrived in a black dress that glimmered like midnight sugar. When she saw me, her smile tightened, as if held up by threads. "Mara," she said smoothly. "What a surprise." "Not a surprise," I said. "An invitation. After all, it's my grandmother's house. Isn't it?" The word grandmother landed between us like a dropped glass. Conversation around us faltered. Her eyes flicked toward Julian, who stood beside me, chin lifted in quiet solidarity. "I beg your pardon," Estelle said finally. I held out the folded letters, tied in Agnes's blue ribbon. "You can read them later. They tell a story you edited out of the family history." Her hand didn't move to take them. "This is absurd." "Absurd," I said, "is burying a woman's love and pretending it never happened. Absurd is calling her granddaughter the help in the house that should have carried her name." People were listening now, The kind of people who loved gossip as long as it wore pearls. I felt the old tremor in my knees. The one that used to come before I spoke in hospice rooms. Before I told a family the truth about what came next. I looked straight at Estelle. And my voice softened. Agnes didn't hide shame in those walls. Estelle. She hid grace. And you mistook it for weakness because you couldn't recognize a love that didn't need an audience. The room was quiet enough to hear the hum of the chandeliers. I didn't need to raise my voice. I've already had the letters authenticated. I'm not here for money. I'm here for memory. The bakery you look down on will carry her name now. Agnes, Etta's honey room. And the first cake will be hers, the one she described in her letters. With honey and lemon. The sweetness that stings. Estelle's face stayed marble still. But I saw it, the faint tremor near her temple. The recognition that the foundation had shifted. Julian's hand found mine. Around us. Whispers bloomed like fast-growing vines. That night, when I got home, I placed the 2 keys side by side on my kitchen counter. I poured tea with honey from Agnes's old jar and watched the light catch it. Thick and slow. I thought about how revenge can taste like justice if you bake it with enough patience, and how sometimes the sweetest victories don't destroy. They reveal. If you're still listening, maybe you've known what it's like to be underestimated, to be mislabeled, to have your story trimmed by someone else's scissors. Don't rush your reckoning. Let it rise in its own time. When it's ready, it will open every door you were told to knock on forever. If you felt something tonight, share it. Tell someone who needs to hear that their quiet dignity is worth more than any inherited crown. And if stories like this find a home in your heart, like, subscribe, and leave a comment. I read them all. The way my grandmother once read her letters slowly, with gratitude, and with honey on my tongue,